I need you to think about something with me for just a moment. Stop and actually think about it. You can cover your hands. You can hide your face. You can spend weeks in the dark outside someone's house, learning when the lights go on, when they come home, which cameras pointed which direction. You can memorize the whole routine. Which door doesn't lock after 9 o'clock? What time the neighbors leave for work? You can layer your clothes, double your gloves, pull a mask so tight that nobody would recognize a single feature of you if they looked directly at your face. You can do all of that. Every careful, methodical thing you can possibly think to do. And you still can't fully control one part of the human body. Just one part. There's something about being human that won't cooperate, no matter how prepared you are, no matter how much time you spent planning. In the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, an 84-year-old woman taken from her home in the Catalina foothills in Tucson, Arizona, on the night of January 31st, that one thing Nancy's body couldn't help but do, that one involuntary detail, might be exactly what's going to be the difference between this case going cold forever and this case finally being solved. I've been sitting with this for days now. I can't let it go. Because when you actually line everything up, all the publicly reported stuff, everything the investigators have confirmed, what the forensic experts are saying on record, a picture starts coming into focus. This isn't a random crime. This isn't some panicked person who just saw an opportunity. This is someone who prepared for almost everything. Almost. Today I'm going to walk you through this. All of it. The DNA and what everyone's been missing about the public conversation around it. The blood on the front doorstep, and what a retired FBI profiler says that tells us about Nancy's last moments inside her home. The 41-minute window that investigators call the absolute center of this entire case. The bite light, and why one small detail like that might have produced the one piece of biological evidence this person genuinely could not plan away. And then, the flower pots. Those flower pots at the back of Nancy's house. When a 30-year SWAT commander was asked directly whether they were collected as evidence, he answered with 3 words I haven't been able to stop thinking about. Stay with me on this. This one goes down deeper than you think. Before I get into any of this, if you've been following Nancy's story and you've been looking for coverage that's actually researched, that has sources, that doesn't have a bunch of noise and speculation clouding things up, please hit subscribe right now. Not for views, for Nancy. This channel isn't moving on until she's home, and I need you here for everything that's about to come. Drop your city in the comments too, would you? I'm curious where in the country people are still watching this, still waiting, still refusing to let it go quiet. Okay, let's start at the beginning. Not with the headlines, not with theories people have cooked up. Let's start with who Nancy actually was. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She lived alone in a quiet neighborhood in the Catalina foothills section of Tucson, the kind of place where people know their surroundings, where routines matter. Her home was organized, her schedule was solid and steady, the kind of life someone builds over decades when they understand what actually matters to them. She called her family regularly. On Sunday mornings, some of them at least, she'd catch church virtually from her living room. She kept her home the way people do when they've had time to figure out exactly what deserves a place in their space and what doesn't. And she loved her back patio. I mean, she really loved it. She spent time out there tending those flower pots herself. She'd arrange them, take care of them. That corner of her yard had become something personal, something that belonged to her in a way that mattered. I'm telling you about this now because it's going to matter more than almost anything else in what happened that night. Keep that detail close. She was also, and her daughter Savannah is very clear about this, a woman with serious back problems. Her mobility wasn't what it used to be. On a good day, she could walk to the mailbox and back. That's not small. That detail changes everything about how you understand what happened that night. We're going to come back to it. The evening of January 31st was ordinary, just a regular night. Nancy had dinner with her daughter's family. Around 9:45, one of them drove her home. She walked inside her house. The door closed behind her. That's the last moment anyone who loved her saw her alive. And they knew it. The next morning, Nancy missed a scheduled call. And for a woman whose life ran on that kind of routine, that was enough to know something was wrong. The family went to check on her. What they found when they got inside that house, it stopped them cold. But not for the reason you'd think, because the house looked almost normal. Most of the rooms were clean. Most things were untouched. There was no obvious chaos anywhere. Nothing that immediately screamed that something terrible had happened. What told the real story was what was missing. Her phone was right there on the counter. Her medication, still in the bottle, still in its place. Her purse sitting where she'd left it. All the things a woman her age simply doesn't leave behind. They were all there, exactly where they should be. And then they found the blood on the front doorstep. And then they found the Ring camera, ripped right off the wall. When someone walks out of their home on purpose, they take what they need. Nancy Guthrie didn't take anything. Nancy Guthrie didn't leave by choice. Law enforcement showed up, and pretty quickly this shifted from being a missing person situation to something else. Sheriff Chris Nanos said it straight from the beginning. This wasn't being treated as a simple disappearance. There were indicators, he said. Some of those indicators haven't ever been fully released to the public. But one thing was clear right away. Someone had been inside that house, someone who wasn't supposed to be there, and they didn't come through a broken window or a kicked-in door. They just came in. Now here's where the timeline becomes absolutely everything. Investigators started rebuilding that night, minute by minute, and two specific times emerged pretty fast as the anchor points for the entire investigation. These are fixed points, they're not flexible. They don't depend on someone's memory or how people interpret things or whose version of events sounds right. They're digital. They're recorded. They exist. 1:47 in the morning. That's when Nancy's doorbell camera stopped recording. It didn't glitch. There wasn't a power surge or a technical fault. It stopped. And investigators didn't treat that as coincidence because of what happened next. 2:28 in the morning. That's when Nancy's pacemaker stopped transmitting data to her phone. Now, I want to be really clear about this because people sometimes misunderstand it. The pacemaker itself didn't stop working. Nancy's heart didn't stop at 2:28. The device was still functioning fine. What stopped was the connection, the wireless link between the pacemaker and the phone it communicated with. Pacemakers send signals wirelessly to a nearby device, usually the patient's phone. When that connection breaks, it means one thing and one thing only. Distance. Nancy's body moved away from where her phone was. Her phone stayed. Nancy didn't. 47 and 2:28. That's 41 minutes. Sit with that number for a second. Not as some abstract thing, as actual time. 41 minutes isn't a smash and grab situation. It's not someone who panicked and ran. 41 minutes is someone moving through a home with enough control to leave most of it looking pretty normal. 41 minutes is someone who knew exactly where they were going and what they were doing when they got there. No forced entry. No missing property. The house looks mostly undisturbed. Just 41 minutes inside. Then blood at the front door. Then silence. Let me talk about the evidence. The physical evidence, because that's where this becomes something. Nancy's DNA has been found outside her home. Multiple locations outside the immediate search area. That's significant. That's not someone who carefully planned to leave nothing behind. That's contact that happened. That's biology that wouldn't cooperate with whoever's plan this was. And there's something else, something that doesn't get talked about enough. Nancy's pacemaker data, that wireless connection I mentioned, it created what investigators call a digital footprint of her location and movement during those 41 minutes. Pacemakers transmit constantly. They send data about heart rate, activity level, movement. That device kept working even as Nancy was being removed from her home. That's forensic information that exists whether someone planned for it or not. The DNA isn't just trace evidence sitting in a lab somewhere. The Tucson Police Department has stated that DNA from the scene has been processed and analyzed. It's in databases. It's being compared. And that's the kind of work that happens when investigators believe they know what they're looking for. That's the kind of work that happens when you're not fishing blindly. Think about what happened with Derek Kella. Remember him? The man who sent messages to media outlets pretending to be Nancy's abductor, demanding money, leaving a digital trail that investigators followed until the whole thing just unraveled. The phone, the account, the location, all traced and identified within days, not weeks, days. You know what that tells you? It tells you something important about the investigative capacity working this case. These people aren't slow. They're not under-resourced. When they have a thread, they pull it, and they pull it fast. Which means anyone who thinks they've covered their tracks well enough to stay hidden from this level of technical analysis is operating on a belief that the evidence doesn't actually support. Here's the truth about digital evidence that no amount of planning really accounts for. When Nancy's phone was removed from her house, it didn't remove Nancy's phone from the network. The logs of every device that connected to towers near her home that night, those still exist. Every single one. The absence of her phone from her location becomes data, and the presence of any other device in that area during those 41 minutes becomes data with a timestamp attached to it. You can't smash a camera and undo the notification it already sent. You can't drive through a neighborhood at 2 in the morning without that vehicle appearing somewhere in thousands of hours of footage that investigators have been working through, frame by frame, building a path. A path that leads away from Nancy's house and into whatever this person thought would hide them. 28 in the morning, a vehicle was captured on camera approximately 2.5 miles from Nancy's home. That distance is just outside the immediate search radius, which means it might not have been part of the initial focus. But once the timeline got locked in, once investigators knew exactly what window they were working inside, footage from that distance became relevant. Not because it proved anything by itself, because it aligned. Alignment is how paths get built. One camera picks up a vehicle. Another camera confirms the direction. Another shows a timestamp that lines up. Individually, none of it is the case. Together, it's a route, and routes lead somewhere. None of this has been publicly confirmed in enough specific detail to constitute official news, but the way the investigation is structured, the language officials have used carefully in their public statements, how fast false leads have been identified and eliminated, the consistent narrowing of what investigators say they don't know. It all points in one direction. This case isn't cold. This case isn't stalled. This case is building towards something that hasn't been announced yet, because announcements come at the end, not in the middle. This case right now is very much in the middle of becoming something. There's one more thing that needs to be said before we get to the ending, and it's not about evidence or timelines or DNA. It's about a family. Savannah went back to work. People noticed. Some people drew conclusions from that. Small conclusions, ugly conclusions that said more about the people drawing them than about Savannah. The reality is simpler and also harder than any of those conclusions. She went back to work because that's what you do when you're living inside a grief that doesn't have a shape yet. When there's no confirmation, no body, no ending, you can't grieve the way grief is supposed to work. You exist in a space that psychologists call ambiguous loss. Every morning starts the same way. A few seconds of normal, and then the weight lands again, and you spend the rest of the day carrying something you can't put down and can't fully hold. Mother's Day has come and gone. Every holiday between January 31st and right now has arrived and passed while Nancy was still missing. Still unaccounted for, still out there somewhere in some form, waiting to come home. Savannah has been measured in every public appearance since her mother disappeared. She hasn't speculated. She hasn't inflamed anything. She's just stayed visible because visibility puts pressure on a case, and pressure matters. A daughter who's spent her entire professional life covering crime and law and justice. She understands that better than almost anyone else would. But the family has also had to deal with things that are hard to describe charitably. Conspiracy theories that pointed at them. Online speculation that treated their grief like a performance. Suggestions from people with accounts and too much time on their hands that a daughter disappeared her own mother for ratings on a television program. I'm not spending time on that because it doesn't deserve the time. What I will say is this. The Guthrie family has carried themselves throughout this investigation with a dignity that's been remarkable, given circumstances that would have broken most people. And they're still waiting. They're still waiting for an answer that hasn't come. Every single day that answer doesn't come is another day that family carries something that no family should ever have to carry. Nancy loved her garden. She loved her patio. She loved that corner of her home she'd made into something personal with those flower pots, that backyard, whatever quiet beauty she'd built there over the years. She had dinner with her daughter's family on the last night anyone saw her alive. One of them drove her home. She walked inside, and then someone came for her in the dark. That person planned this. That person prepared. That person spent days or weeks out there in that quiet Tucson neighborhood, mapping cameras, identifying locks, learning the routines of a woman who had done nothing to deserve any of it. That person smashed the lights and propped the doors and moved the flower pots and believed in that backyard with all the cameras dark that nobody could see them. But they were visible. They were touching things, and what they touched in a space they thought nobody was watching might still be somewhere, in a lab in Florida, on a patio in the Tucson sun. Waiting, because evidence doesn't care about intentions. Evidence doesn't care about how carefully someone planned. Evidence only cares about contact. And contact, however brief it was, however dark the night, however certain someone was that nobody was watching, leaves something behind. If you have any information about Nancy's disappearance, anything at all, something that seems small or something you're not even sure matters, please make the call. The FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. You can submit information online at tips.fbi.gov. The reward in this case is approximately $1.2 million. You don't need to be certain. You don't need to have the whole picture. Investigators build the picture from pieces. You just need to provide the piece you have. Because sometimes, in cases like this, one piece is everything. Nancy Guthrie isn't a case file. She's not a news cycle. She's a mother and a grandmother. She's a woman who made a beautiful patio and loved her family and deserved to be safe in her own home. Whatever happened on the night of January 31st deserves to be fully understood, not partially, not assumed, fully. And the people working this case are still working it, quietly, carefully, and closer to an answer than they were yesterday. Before I go, I need to say something directly to the people who've been here through all of this. You didn't have to stay. You didn't have to keep watching, keep asking questions, keep showing up every time there was something new to work through. But you did, and that's not nothing. In a world that moves fast and forgets faster, the fact that you're still here, still paying attention, still refusing to let Nancy's name disappear into the noise, that matters more than you probably realize. A very special thank you to the Notebook VE community. You're the reason this channel keeps going. You show up every single time. You bring your attention and your care and your refusal to look away, and I see every single one of you. This channel exists because of you. Nancy's name stays in this conversation because of you. If you're new here, welcome. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and understand that this is a place where we don't move on until there's something to move on to. Because Nancy Guthrie isn't done. This case isn't done. And we're going to be here for every development, every update, every answer, until she comes home. I'll see you in the next one.